Good morning, everyone, as you join us. We'll just give it another minute for participants to just join in, and then we'll start. Oh, welcome. I see in the chat box we have somebody from Vancouver, so very, very welcome. Morning to everybody. Okay, so we'll start off, and a very good morning to everybody, and we're so delighted to have you back for our day-long presentations. It promises to be a very exciting day today with keynotes, some workshops, an interview, and then Georgia Macmillan, who's coordinating this conference, is doing a wonderful Dark Skies event tonight at 8 p.m. So that's a great event for the whole family. So my name is Mary Skillington. I'm an early childhood lecturer in GMIT on the Mayo campus. And you're all very, very welcome here today to our Leave No Stone Unskipped conference. We had a wonderful night last night with Angela Hanscom from the USA, and we look forward to an even more exciting day today. What we will do now is we just like to know where people are from, and George has, if you would like to log on to menti.com, either on a new tab or on your mobile phone. And Georgia has put up a poll to ask people where they're from, and the code is posted in the chat box. So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box, and I might just find the code and call it out. Just go back up. I think it's back up at the start.
Just reposted it, Mary.
Oh, did you? Okay, that's great. So if you'd like to, but once you get onto menti.com, you'll be asked for a code, and the code is 46923048, and it's in the chat box too, 46923048. So we'll give that a minute to populate to see where people are joining us from today. Great, it's populating already. So we have Carlow, Donegal, Limerick, Longford. George, you might be able to see the smaller print there as well. Clare.
Scotland.
Wow.
West.
Donegal. Canada. Northern Ireland.
Donegal's very strong.
Donegal's pretty strong. Milford in Donegal, Waterford City, United
Leitrim.
States, Burton Port in County Donegal, Westport.
Fantastic. So we leave the Menti running there for a minute while I just say that it's a webinar, so all participants are muted and cameras are turned off, but please engage with us on the Q&A. So if you have any questions for Tim, if you put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, then after Tim's presentation, Louise will have a conversation with Tim, and they'll go through the questions. And there's also a chat box just for general comments. Tim's presentation today as well is going to be very interactive, so I'm really excited for that. While we're waiting, we'll just invite Thelma Baran, who's from the Children and Young People Services Committee, just to introduce the Children and Young People Services Committee and speak about that for a few minutes. So I'll hand you over to Thelma.
Thanks, Mary, and you're all very welcome from Donegal to Canada to Mayo to the conference today. So on behalf of Mayo Children and Young People Services Committee, I'd like to welcome you to Leave No Stone Unskipped, our Outdoor Play Conference 2021. So it looks like it's going to be a really great day. It's brilliant to have such a mix of contributors from international experts to some of our own local experts. So I hope you all enjoy the day very much. So just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a health promotion officer with the Health Service Executive, and I represent the Health Service Executive on Mayo Children and Young People Services Committee. So the role of the Children and Young People Services Committee is to implement the National Children's Strategy at a local level. So the idea is that it's a forum for joint planning, improved delivery and coordination of services for children, young people and their families. And the committee is made up of members from the community groups, statutory organisations and voluntary organisations who all work with children. So under the children's strategy, there's a number of different outcomes that we're all striving to achieve. And one of them is active and healthy children. So that's, I suppose, where our outdoor play conference comes into this. We developed an outdoor play strategy, or an early years strategy, for Mayo a number of years ago. And one of the priority actions there is to develop and support a culture of play in Mayo, including outdoor play, play in the natural environment, interactive play. And we also want to promote the benefits of free play and unstructured physical play, and look at maybe some of the barriers are to outdoor play. So this is a great partnership we have with GMIT, who are a huge asset to our local community. So there's a brilliant partnership within GMIT between the outdoor education course and the early childhood education and care course. And they work together to support us to promote outdoor play in County Mayo. So I suppose I want to thank the GMIT for their brilliant work, and I'm really looking forward to the message of the conference today. So I suppose in a world where parents are maybe bombarded with different kind of complicated messages around what the best thing to do with your children is, really the message of this conference is just to let them be, let them get out, let them play in their natural environment, and be themselves. And as a consequence of that, we're hoping that children's resilience and well-being will be promoted, and I suppose that they'll have a greater appreciation of the environment around them. So thanks again to Georgia and the GMIT for their brilliant work in organising this, and thanks to all the speakers and workshop coordinators today, and I'm looking forward to a great day. Thanks a million.
Thanks a million, Thelma, for that introduction. And now we are just so excited to introduce you to Tim Gill. And I've listened to many of Tim's talks online, and everybody says that he's always looking ahead, and I completely agree with that. He's just incredible. His book, No Fear Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society, is one of our core readings for the outdoor play module in GMIT. It's just a brilliant, brilliant book. And we're just delighted to have him here today to talk about really the whole area of risk and the whole area of opportunities for children for free play. And as a really, and really, I hope that we can take away many of his insights, and this will be just more than a conversation, that we can really take this forward and do something for young children. So I'll hand you over to Tim Gill. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that warm and generous welcome, Mary, and to everyone involved in the conference so far. As you've been told already, I'm going to try and make this quite interactive. I don't know about you, but what is it? It is a year now since we've been living very different lives, and certainly for me, one of the features has been this thing here has come to dominate my life to a much greater extent than I ever expected, and I'm trying to do all I can to get this to not just be a sort of passive one-way conversation. So look out for all of that. Let me start by sharing my screen because that's a good. Here we are. It's that one that I want. So I'm hoping you can see my opening slide, which just gently, humorously points at some of the ways in which our anxiety about children is expressed, and also points to some of my own personal interest in all of this, which is really from my work going back decades on the importance of play and of a balanced approach to play when we're thinking about the places where we that we design and create for children, playgrounds, but also neighborhoods. So I think when we're thinking about children today, one good place to start is to think about our own childhoods and the kind of places we used to spend time. So my first interactive interaction with you is to invite you to think about, just see what's going on here. I'm hoping that why is this? I cannot get my slides to move. Oh, give me a second.
Yep.
Okay, so that needs to go. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to just shut something up and then I'm going to start sharing again. Apologies for this. Let's just do this again. Here we go. Share screen. Right, let's do this. Excellent. Phew. Think about your own childhood and the kind of places you used to enjoy spending time, the kind of places you used to go and play, and picture in your mind one place that you would say was your favorite place to play. And what I'd like you to do is I'm going to ask you two questions. They're simple sort of yes, no questions. So the first question, and here's where you can use your Menti interaction, was your favorite place to play indoors or out of doors? Very simple. So I'm hoping that people can go in and start voting and we can start seeing the results of that. So, okay, good. We're getting some results. I can see 2 people have voted already. Excellent. That leaves about, what is it, 170 or 190? Great. More votes coming in all the time.
The code is in the chat box if people are looking.
The code is in the chat box. It's also at the top of the screen. So 2986402. If you've just come along and you're not familiar with Menti, it's super easy. If you're on a browser like I am, just open a new browser page, type the word Menti into Google or whatever. It'll take you straight to the Menti website and you can use that code to vote. You can also download an app if you want, if you haven't already, and you can use the Menti app on your phone. Exactly the same process. Add in the code and away you go. Now, okay, so we're seeing, let's just say a significant majority of people are saying that their favorite place to play was out of doors. Not everybody, but now I had a hunch what the answers to those questions might be. Of course, this is an outdoor play conference, so you might be thinking, well, we're not exactly a representative sample. I have done this same exercise with a group of risk managers in local authorities, and they have come up with exactly the same response to this first question. So I think we get the picture there. I want to move on to the second question. So let's do that. Thank you. You can carry on voting with the first, because at the end of this, we can gather up all of the results and they can be shared in the final sort of completed set of slides. So feel free to carry on. But here's the second question. Was that place, the place that you pictured in your mind, supervised by adults, yes or no? Very prompt voting coming in this time. That's great to see. Thank you very much for everybody who's doing this. And well, again, I think we can see the pattern of the results. I have been lucky enough to give talks and run workshops in 5 continents to people from all walks of life. And without exception, the broad pattern that we see from those two questions is what we're seeing this morning. The places that are most resonant to us from our own childhoods are places that are out of doors and places that are more or less out of sight of adults. I just want to explore a little bit more the qualities of some of these places. So my third little bit of interaction, again, it's a word cloud. So just like you were saying, telling us all where you were from, I'm going to ask you to use Menti to type in 3 words that describe the place that you were picturing in your mind. Whatever you like, any adjectives, labels, nouns, any words, and we'll do a word cloud and see what comes up. And well, very interesting to see some of these words come in: open, green, forest, woods, exciting, peaceful. This is great. Every time I do this, it just goes a little bit differently. Fun, free, coming out. We've got friends, really important. One of the key ingredients of any magic play space is other people, and especially other children and friends and peers. So I think we're getting a picture here that the kind of places that that we hark back to when we think of our childhoods are places where we could feel a sense of possibility, a sense of freedom, a sense of adventure. Freedom, I think, is coming out as one of the words in this, and that. Okay, so the nostalgia bell is ringing loudly, and I know that this topic can rapidly become sort of characterized as a sort of misty-eyed remembrance of things past. I think that's too quick. It is not mere nostalgia to remind ourselves of these places. These places were I think part of what made us who we are, of places where we could figure out what engaged us, what we could do, and what it felt like to have a little bit of what I call a taste of freedom. Where for these moments or hours, the anxieties of the wider world faded into the background, and we were kind of trying on for size of what it felt like to be a human being and to have a taste of autonomy. So, by the way, I just thought I would show you, when I do this exercise, I'm often taken back to this place. So I grew up in a big village on the outskirts of London. And to be honest, from a fairly early age, I more or less had the run of the place. But there was one place that sort of felt was a magical place. And I think the grown-ups called it Pond Close, but we always called it Pony. And here's some images of Pony. It was on the other side of the railway line from the village. There was water, there were trees, there weren't very many people around. We had some magical and occasionally somewhat dangerous times there. I won't dwell on that. But what I will do is highlight that I think my own childhood, and I'm guessing for many of you, what this brings out is that things are different for children today. And this map, which is the first figure, it's figure 1.1 from my book Urban Playground. I'll give that a plug later on, my new book. But this shows what you might call the kind of shrinking horizons of childhood. What it maps out is what you might call the home territory, or the roaming range of 4 8-year-old children. And there happen to be 4 children who are in 4 generations of the same family, who all grew up in the same city, happens to be Sheffield. And you can see how the big blob that takes up most of the map, that's the roaming range of the great-grandfather in this family, who could travel 10 kilometers, 6 miles across the city on his own. And then you can see how the circles shrink until here's the one for the son. This is actually about 12 years ago now, who's allowed to go to the end of his street. And we know from studies, first of all, we know that this is a almost universal pattern in everywhere around the world, boys and girls, all social groups. We're seeing this, what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And we also know that today, most children, certainly in the UK, and I'm guessing in Ireland, it's not very common for 8-year-olds to be allowed much beyond the shadows cast by their own houses. So this change in the very nature of childhood, I think, is one of the most significant and underexplored. And it's most of what I do and what gets me out of bed in the mornings is reflecting on and responding to this change. Now, I want to be clear, a couple of things. Firstly, we can't just turn the clock back. And I'm not suggesting there was a kind of golden age to grow up. But I think what we can and should do is ask ourselves, what are children today losing out on? And how might we, and I believe they are, they're losing out on precisely those spaces and times where they could feel a sense of who they were and what they could do and go where their imagination and their inclinations took them. And so what can we do to compensate children for this loss? If we believe, as I do, that these sorts of experiences are part of a happy and healthy childhood. And just to take that on a little bit, and say why I think these sorts of experiences are important is that if we think about childhood, then amongst other things, it's a kind of journey. And at the beginning of the journey, children are very helpless and dependent upon adults for their most basic needs. But then as children grow up, they gradually gain autonomy and independence. Always in a second by second and moment by moment way, until you see this journey, and at the end of the journey, somewhere, and it may not always be entirely clear where, we are independent, confident, capable, responsible, and hopefully resilient people. And so the journey of childhood is in part, central to it, is the gradual transfer of responsibility from adults to children. And I believe that it's vital to appreciate that, and also to do what we can to make sure that process is graduated and kind of managed, and that none of the steps are too great. Again, I'll come on to that later on. So that's a little bit of scene setting. I'm going to be looking a bit more about risk and my interest in it, what I think a balanced approach looks like and what it involves. I'm touching on parental attitudes. I'm going to look a little bit at regulation and the law, and then close with some ideas and pointers to other resources. So that's the pattern of the talk. And just to say that we have slightly ahead of myself. We have another poll. So I want everyone who's worked in childcare or early childhood settings to just answer the question: have you worked in a setting that has banned the use of these items? So that's egg boxes and toilet roll holders, just in case you can't see the photo. Now, actually, I'm just wondering, have I made it? No, it might just be this one. Do you know what? I think the interactive slide has got missed out. Damn. Okay, well, if you want to comment in the comment box, just with a yes or no, then in the chat box, that's what I mean. So I'm going to have a really quick look in the chat and see what people say. So we've got quite a few yeses and also some nos. The poll has appeared on Menti. Oh, okay. Why isn't it appearing on my screen? Let me just close that. There you go. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that some people have said yes and some people have said no. I can tell you, when I do childcare workers, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of people answer yes to this question, that they have worked in settings where the use of egg boxes and toilet roll holders has been banned. With a rhetorical flourish, I can move to my next slide and show you that, in fact, this is a myth. That it was indeed the myth of the month for the UK's Health and Safety Executive. So this is the regulatory body, the government body with the big stick, who about 13 years ago declared that it was simply no credible agency had ever banned the use of egg boxes and toilet roll holders in craft settings. It's a perfect example of how we become so worried about harm to children, and it's become a kind of free-floating anxiety that almost anything can be labelled as troubling or dangerous. And once that idea takes root, it can spread even in the absence of any reasonable basis for claiming it. So, and you've got a similar, I think, issue. And by the way, this is not just an issue in Ireland, but I just happen to remember coming across this, well, quite a few years ago when I was writing my book. And this is, schools banning running in the playground, again, because of fears over, well, firstly, accidents, but secondly, being sued. I'm going to come on to the legal stuff a bit later on, as I said, but I think this is another example of the same, what you could call a sort of climate of anxiety. And when I talked about risk anxiety disorder in the title of this, I wasn't being entirely flippant. So my own interest in all of this really started from when I used to work for an NGO called the Children's Play Council, which promoted the importance of play. And a group of us became very worried about this, particularly this trend to try and make playgrounds utterly, quotes, safe. And you can see a particularly depressing example of that on your screen. And that we realized that things had gone too far, and that we were losing sight of what play was all about and what playgrounds are supposed to be doing. And I have to say that I think one of the reasons why this shift happened was that, as well as a broader kind of growing climate of anxiety about risk and safety, there was some specific campaigning and messaging about playgrounds. And one of those was, and there may be some older members of the audience who can remember this, but the BBC television programme That's Life. I'm not sure how popular it was in the Republic of Ireland, but I can tell you it was a very influential and widely watched programme. And in the late 80s, it ran a campaign to try and force playground providers to fit spongy rubber surfacing, so basically soft surfacing in playgrounds. And you can see here, this is a sort of experiment that Esther Ranson is doing, where she's holding a china plate and she's first of all dropping it on the studio floor, and then secondly dropping it on some rubber tiles. Now, of course, the result of that experiment is entirely predictable, but what I want to invite you to think about is what this is saying about children. So I saw this video. This is a photograph of mine from somebody who lent me a video of the program. And it was a light bulb moment for me, because what I realized was that what's the message here? The message is that children are as vulnerable as china plates, that they are irredeemably stupid, and that the adult role is to protect them at all costs. And actually that came out from some of the rest of the program. So what we're seeing here is what I call in No Fear, the philosophy of protection. As I said, our job as adults is to protect children from harm and risk. And it's that philosophy that I think underpins an awful lot of why we go wrong when it comes to risk. Because of course, I'm not saying that the people who were making this case were trying to do bad things to children, but it's that our well-intentioned efforts to try and keep children safe are actually becoming, or in danger of becoming, counterproductive. So it's beautifully captured, this line of thought, in a talk that I was lucky enough to hear the Danish architect Helle Nebelong give her first visit, I think, certainly her first talk to the UK back in 1999, where she talks about standardized playgrounds being dangerous, because when the distance between all the rungs in a climbing net or a ladder is exactly the same, the child has no need to concentrate on where he puts his feet, and that this lesson cannot be carried over to the knobbly and asymmetrical forms with which one is confronted throughout life. So what Helle's beautifully describing here is a complete paradigm shift, that instead of talking about protecting children, what we should be thinking about is allowing children to develop their resilience. And again, in No Fear, I talk about a philosophy of resilience. And I'm pleased to tell you that I think this notion is gaining significant ground. So we're a long way from where we were, certainly back in the 80s, and even maybe 10 years ago. So you remember that playground, the photo I showed you of the very depressing slide? Well, here is a photograph of a more recent unsupervised public playground. This is in the Olympic Park in London. So it's open 24 hours a day. And I hope you agree, it looks rather different to the one that I showed you earlier. I have to say, this has a special place in my heart, this playground. I was involved in kind of setting the brief and choosing the design team, fantastic team of designers who built this. If you ever get to the Olympic Park, head up to Tumbling Bay Playground. It really is, it's an amazing space. So that should give you a little bit of pause for thought. How is it that we in the UK have managed to move on from this sort of ever-growing anxiety about risk, about liability and safety and all the rest of it? How is it that playgrounds like this are now being built? Well, the short answer is that over time, a balanced approach to risk has emerged, and it's captured in this. It's that when we're thinking about children's play, we shouldn't be doing a conventional risk assessment. Conventional risk assessment is basically about reducing risk through control measures, and that's the left-hand side of this slide. But instead, we should be weighing up the risks and the benefits, because we need to recognize the benefits that come when children are allowed to engage with uncertainty. So that's Hélène Ebelong's point about the knobbly and asymmetrical forms of life. Now, I'm going to do a tiny bit of actual interaction that I'm not going to be able to see you do, but I'm going to have to just trust you on this. So, and it's going to involve you having to hand two things. First, a pen, any old pen, pencils will work. Pen, pencil, just get one to hand. Secondly, your mobile phone, okay, a mobile phone. And I also want you to stand up, because in case you hadn't noticed, sitting is the new smoking. We're all sitting down too much, and it's not good for us. So I have absolutely no idea if anybody is going to do this, but I'm going to give it a go. Here you go. There's a phone. So firstly, I want you to stand up with a pen in your hand. Just get a bit further back and just throw the pen up and down in the air. Okay? Throw the pen up and down in the air. You can maybe move it from one hand to the other. You can do a bit more spinning if you like. Phone throwing up and down in the air. I'll wait 10 more seconds to allow people to have a go at that. And I guess you can see what's coming now. I now want you to put the pen down. Just crouch down a little. Take your mobile phone and throw the mobile phone up and down in the air. Okay? Now, you will notice something different, I hope, about throwing the phone up and down compared to throwing the pen. You can sit down now, by the way, those of you who finished that exercise. I hope you'll notice things felt a little bit different, okay? And this is the really important thing about risk coming out here. And that is this, that we change our behavior depending on the kind of potential outcomes. Yes, how bad things might get, or the, if you like, the risks and rewards. When I'm throwing a pen up and down, it's a pen. If I drop it, doesn't really matter. When I've got an expensive piece of technology in my hand, then that balance between, risk and benefit is instantly changed. And also, of course, children do this, you could say almost instinctively, but certainly subconsciously, dynamically, and very complicated changes in behavior, which are rarely entirely the matter of decisions, conscious decision making. They're just about the way that we go about things. If those of you who might have come across the difference between type 1 and type 2 thinking, that's what I'm talking about here. We'll come back to that, but the takeaway here is managing risk is not always easy. It can get pretty complicated because we human beings, we're not like robots or machines. In our behavior is easily predictable, and in particular, we are very sensitive to changes in our environment. And one of those is that when somebody or when there are features that make things safer for us, and we can perceive those changes, then we may well behave more dangerously, if you like, or certainly change our behavior as a result. I sometimes show a photograph of, American footballers with all the padding and the helmets and everything. Those humans are coming at each other in a way that they would never do if they weren't wearing that protective equipment. What that means is that it can get complicated when we start thinking about safety. Okay, let's move on. Here's a quote from our former Chief Medical Officer in England. So this is not just people like me or outdoorsy types or Bear Grylls or whoever saying that a bit more risk is important in children's lives. So this is the former, the highest government expert in England making the same case and talking about how we need to expose young people to low doses of challenges in order to strengthen their ability to act effectively later in life. Now, she would not be saying that if it were not supported by good psychological and indeed even clinical evidence. So, we're on safe, solid ground here about these lines of argument. And indeed, in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive, I've already mentioned them, also agrees. So this is a statement, you can find it online, which is precisely about children's play and recognizes that balancing the risks and the benefits in a risk-benefit assessment, we'll come on to that, what that looks like in a second. So a risk-benefit assessment is a sensible approach to risk management. So this really should be mainstream, and we're getting to the point where it is mainstream. Okay, I want to just see, checking my times, another tiny bit of audience participation for you now. This isn't going to involve Menti or anything, and I'm not going to be able to, actually there'll be a little bit of Menti in a minute, but I want you to have a look at this feature. So this is a landscape feature in a park in Hull. I hope you can see that. It's called the Khyber Pass, and it's about so it's a sort of landscape flourish in this park, and the height of that rough wall that you can see is about 4 or 5 meters, and it's eminently climbable. Okay, so people who are minded to can climb up and down this wall. So you can see a few facts about it so far. So this is just a description of the site. It's in a public park. It's open, I think, 24 hours a day. So what I'd like you to do is to just spend a minute with a pen. You don't have to stand up or throw them around, just a pen and a piece of paper, and just think about, firstly, the benefits. What are the benefits for everybody, but perhaps particularly children, of this feature, and particularly thinking of the fact, that the known fact that children climb up this this wall. So think about the benefits, the good things that happen because children have the opportunity in this environment to climb and test themselves. And then I also want you to think about the risks, about the things that might go wrong. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm asking you, if you like, to kind of put yourself in the position of the park manager. The park manager actually has a little bit of a problem here, because the park manager, let's call her Frida. Frida knows that children are climbing up this wall, knows that there are some things that might go wrong. So what's Frida going to do about it? And that's the third thing I want you to think about, your decision. You've thought about the benefits, you've thought about the risks, the things that might go wrong. What do you do about it? Here's where Menti comes in. What I want you to do is to give your verdict on the Khyber Pass, and you can see the options in front of you there. It's fine as it is. You can add more signage. You might add safety surfacing. You can add some barriers. You can design out climbing, maybe by just changing the walls altogether. You can take the whole feature out, or maybe something else that I haven't thought about. So fantastic. We're seeing some responses around the Khyber Pass. And I'm going to give that a little bit more time. So this is, for those of you who haven't done risk benefit assessment, this is a kind of a test drive. Yeah, this is a little your guinea pigs checking out this new approach or progressive approach to the management of risk. And thank you very much to everyone who's taking part in this. We're getting I think an emerging picture. There's a clear majority who are basically saying it's fine as it is. There's a group, a significant group. I'm going to say perhaps a quarter of people who say, yeah, we could do with some signage, and then a much smaller group, probably about 1 in 10, who'd like to see some surfacing, and so on and so forth. Now, I tell you the last time I checked, but it was a few years ago. Hull, it's Kingston upon Hull Council, hadn't done anything to explicitly change the offer and the arrangement in the Khyber Pass in the park. If anybody knows anything different, I'd be very happy to hear about it. So the reality appears to be that it's fine as it is. And by the way, if you speak to people from Hull, anybody who grows up in Hull knows that park and knows this pass. And it's almost a rite of passage if you're a young person growing up in Hull, that you kind of, sooner or later, you're going to have a go on that wall and see if you can climb to the top. So it's part of the kind of children and young people's culture of that city, and in a way that I think would actually be part of a risk benefit assessment. You would recognize that and celebrate that. Doesn't necessarily mean that you allow things to go, because it is a risk benefit process, but I think that was interesting to hear. Now, here's the second bit of interaction I want for you, and that is to invite you not to say any more about the Khyber Pass, but to tell me something about the process I've just asked you to go through. So I've just asked you, in effect, to do a risk benefit assessment. As I say, to put yourself in the position of the parks person. So what did you think about the process? Again, you can choose any words you like to describe the process of risk benefit assessment. What did it feel like? Was it, I'm not going to try and put words into people's mouths, because that would be leading and kind of perhaps bias the results. So any words you like to describe the process that you've gone through. Oh, so there's a few. I'm going to let it sort of bubble away for a minute to see if there's any sort of repeat phrases coming on, because I can see that we're not getting, okay, we're beginning to get a few words being chosen more than once. Useful, that's nice to hear. Balanced, fair, conflicting, that's interesting. So maybe that goes to my point earlier about that sometimes this is complicated. And one of the challenges around risk management is that we want to have some easy answers, or reassure ourselves that we're absolutely, definitely doing the right thing. This is all about uncertainty. This is about us learning to live in a world where the outcomes are sometimes uncertain, and helping children to live in a world where the outcomes are sometimes uncertain. There's a writer on risk, a guy called John Adams, and one of the papers that he wrote is, it's something like, risk management, it's not rocket science, it's more complicated than that. Okay, there is no way we can avoid sometimes getting into difficult judgments and situations, because the situation can sometimes be complicated. And that's one of the reasons I like that example of the Khyber Pass. Okay, thank you so much everyone for doing that. I'm just going to remind myself of where I am. So that wasn't actually the full risk benefit assessment process. That was a kind of short version. This is what it looks like in I should say it's a process I've been associated with for a good 15 years or so. So it's, again, close to my heart. I'm one of the people who's been flying the flag for RBA over a decade or more. The process that we set out, my colleagues and I, in various places, and I'll tell you where at the end, looks like this. So you think about, you start, whatever your question is, whether it's about a program, an activity, a structure, a space, you start by thinking about the benefits. What are the good things that you want to happen? And it's really important that you start with those, because you need to have a clear picture in your mind of what you want to come out of the experience. Then you think about the risks, the things that might go wrong. But you might also want to think about a couple of other things before you get to your decision. And you can see them there. Local factors. It could be a whole bunch of things that might be about the children that you work with. To take a really obvious example, if you're designing a play feature that's aimed at teenagers, then you're going to take a different view to the view you might take if you're designing a play feature for toddlers. Okay, that, if you like, is a local factor. But there might be factors about the immediate environment, or about the parents or the culture or the community that you're working in. But you might also want to take into account what we call here precedents and comparisons. And this simply, we do a lot when we're thinking about risk in our lives. Look around, see what other people are doing. You're thinking, do you know, I'm interested in having a fire pit in my outdoor space. What have other settings done that have maybe brought in a fire pit into their outdoor space? What can you learn from what they have learned? Then you can make your decision and see it through. So that's the process, and it's what we call a narrative process. Okay. I'm sure many of you work directly with children, and so one aspect of all of this is your second by second interactions with children. And this is also it gets complicated, because you can't fill out an RBA, you know, if a child's doing something dangerous right in front of you. You know, you have to act. So I'm going to introduce you to a rather wonderful rule of thumb that I encountered from an early childhood setting in Toronto, in Canada, a few years back, and it's called the 17-second rule. And so you can imagine, you know, you're an educator, you're working in this outdoor space. It's not particularly adventurous, but you know, it's an outdoor space that the setting has brought in some features to make it more interesting. So what's the 17-second rule? Here's the 17-second rule. If, as an educator, you see a child who seems to be in some trouble, who's maybe fallen over, or is about to do something that you're not sure about, or maybe we're not talking about physical risk, maybe we're talking about emotional risk. Maybe they're having an argument, or seeming to get into a conflict with another child. Okay, so the 17-second rule is this: you wait for 17 seconds before you step in. Okay, it's a rule of thumb, by the way. It's not an absolute rule, but I hope you can get the point. The point is that the educators here are using this rule to get themselves to pause, to have a moment of reflection, to ask themselves the question, do I really need to step in here, or can I just hold back and see how the situation unfolds? And I spoke to some of the educators in this setting, and they told me that the vast majority of times when they applied the 17-second rule, the children themselves basically figured out, you know, and resolved the situation, whatever the situation was. So again, it's Hele Nebelong's point about the knobbly and asymmetrical forms of life. I think that's a really nice example of how you can bring a balanced approach into your pedagogy. Okay, I've got a little bit more audience interaction now, and I'm going to slight change of tone, and it kind of relies on an assumption, and my assumption is that you can buy Marmite in Ireland. I'm hoping you can buy Marmite in Ireland. Let's just see how it goes. I'm going to ask everybody to vote on how much Marmite. And by the way, anybody who's scratching their heads, Marmite, international people, is a sort of yeast extract. It's incredibly salty, and it divides opinion, at least in the UK, where it's a kind of household product. And so what I'm seeing here, so there's a whole thing about Marmite haters and Marmite lovers. You can go on the internet and find out more about it. So what we're seeing is that it in fact appears that, at least for this audience, Marmite is perhaps not such a divisive substance as it's sometimes made out to be. So you have got indeed a group of people who are not keen, but you've got a fair spread of people who are, yeah, whatever, don't care, and then a small group who love it. Why am I talking to you about Marmite? Okay, we would say, I think, that how much you like Marmite is broadly speaking a matter of opinion. It's a subjective issue. We can live in a world where people have different views about Marmite. I myself live in a house where people have different views about Marmite. I cannot stand the stuff. My partner really gets quite twitchy if there isn't at least 2 jars in the kitchen. So that's right, either end of the extremes, that's all right. Marmite, okay. We don't judge people too much or think that they're wrong because they have a different view. This, by the way, was a pilot of what I'm sometimes called a values continuum. So it's sizing out where people are on a kind of range or spectrum. So that this was a trial run. The next question, which is one that I'm more interested in. Okay, so instead of asking you about Marmite, I'm going to ask you about the most dangerous thing that you like doing. And again, I'm going to give you 6 choices. You can see the choice there, ranging from, actually, I get quite nervous walking down the stairs, or, stepping out of my front door, through to, I'm really keen on jumping out of a plane with a tiny parachute on my back. And I'm kind of hoping, here we go. Here's the some emerging results. So thank you again to people who are responding. Obviously, this is slightly artificial. I'm just going to have a drink of water while some more people vote. When I do this in person, I say in a workshop, I don't give any particular choices. I just let people talk to each other and figure out where they might be. So one of the interesting things about that is that you get people thinking, well, what is more dangerous? Is skiing more dangerous than mountain biking? Maybe not. What about bungee jumping? Is that dangerous, or does it just feel dangerous? Discuss, but not now. Okay, so what we're seeing again, obviously a little bit more of a shift over to the adventurous end of this spectrum. Well done, an honest person who is not unwilling to say that they're perhaps what I'm talking about here is what you could call a risk thermostat. It's our sort of tolerance for danger or uncertainty. And again, just as with Marmite, we're on a spectrum. And there are some people who, really, and especially, I guess, there may be some people who are outside of this audience who are, not very comfortable with the idea of spending time in the outdoors at all. Through to people, never mind skydiving, what really lights their candle is, wingsuit, using a wingsuit. So this is like a kind of slightly inflated suit with wings, where you jump off of a scary place and you literally fly through the air until you're just about at a point where you can use your tiny parachute to then it really is. I think it possibly qualifies as the most dangerous leisure pursuit on earth. So just as with Marmite, there's a spectrum. And I hope, just as with Marmite, we'd agree that you can be at different ends in this spectrum. It doesn't, we can live in a world where people have different attitudes to risk. But here's where there's, I think, a difference. Firstly, this matters. This is important. It's really important for us to figure out what our tolerance for risk is and where our own risk thermostat setting is. It helps us to know what it feels like to get outside of our comfort zones and to know that we need to do something about it. So thinking about it from the educational point of view, it's really important for children to know where their risk thermostat is. And here's the second thing: no one else can tell you where your risk thermostat setting is. You only find out from the inside. You find out by getting close to the edge of your comfort zone. Okay, I'm going to need to speed up a bit now. I will just say a bit about parents, because again, you can put parents on a spectrum when it comes to their attitudes to risk, and that's what this slide illustrates. So at one end of the spectrum, you'll find parents who are in the market for these products on eBay. Those are toddler knee pads that mitigate the risk of injury from crawling. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you'll find parents with a very different approach to child safety, and that's a heading from a family where the mother actually left their children alone in the house for 3 weeks. I'm not being flippant here. These are real life situations, but what I'm suggesting, again, most of us are somewhere in the middle, and most parents are somewhere in the middle. But I think most parents want their children to grow up to be confident, capable, independent, responsible people. And that word responsibility and resilient as well are really important, I think, to remember when it comes to the conversations that you might have, particularly with the anxious and vocal parents, the parents who might be in the market for those toddler knee pads. Okay, I'm going to skip a slide or two. I just want to talk a bit about the law, because this is obviously an area of worry. Now, in every jurisdiction that I've looked at, what does the law require? The law requires us to take reasonable steps. Okay, different words in different contexts, but that's the basic idea. No legal jurisdiction says that we have to give a guarantee that nothing bad will happen or no child will get hurt. Okay, reasonableness is the goal. So take this on a bit. If you feel as an educator or somebody running a setting that people are asking you to go beyond what is reasonable, then they are being unreasonable. Okay, that's what reasonable means. And just in brief, I looked into what this means in Ireland. So I went online, found Kroner's Guide to Irish Law, and there you go. The Health and Safety at Work Act in Ireland uses the exact same phrase as the British Health and Safety at Work Act, which asks for measures to be taken so far as is reasonably practicable. And I'm pleased to say that the kind of approach that we want to be seeing in early childhood settings is also being stated within national guidance and expert sources. So here's a quote that I hope some of you are familiar with. And here is another from a guide to reflective practice. Opportunities to challenge and, quotes, safe risk. I'm not entirely wild about that phrase, safe risk. The problem there is the meaning of the word safe. And it goes back to the anxious and vocal parents earlier. For some people, safe means there's a guarantee that nothing bad will happen. And actually, that's not a very helpful way to understand the word safe. Okay, I'm going to skip my final interaction because I'm conscious of time and I want to get to the Q&A. Here are some ideas that you can take forward in your settings and in your practice to introduce more uncertainty and open-ended and indeed risky experiences in children. I'm sure that many of you are doing them already, but if you like, there's sort of headings that you could explore and unpack. And I'm a particular fan of Forest School. For my sins, I am the patron of the Forest School Association here in the UK. I think Forest School is a wonderful idea and deserves much broader support. I did say I'd give a tiny plug for my book. This is my latest book. So in a way, my own work has shifted away from that kind of educational focus and are focused on risk within settings and more to, you remember my map and the expanding of children's horizons, how we can get neighborhoods to be more inviting, engaging places for children, and how the way we build towns and cities can allow children more everyday freedom. So my book, Urban Childhood, has just come out. I'll share a link in the chat for people who may want to order it. But essentially in that book, I talk about the importance of 4 building blocks that come together to expand the freedoms in a neighborhood. And you can see them there. Streets, walking and cycling, particularly cycling, really valuable for young people, but sadly downplayed. thinking about public space, not just playgrounds. This is not just about playground design, also thinking about the design of housing. Here's some resources around risk that you may want to check. You'll get these slides, the organisers, after the show, so you'll be able to find and click on the links. Some of them I've already talked about. There's a couple of wonderful videos. One is really short. This one, Ravenswood, it's a minute and a half walking the plank. It's a beautiful video. I think it's not unlike the video that that you saw last night from one of your speakers. And I should fly the flag for a risk-benefit toolkit that I co-wrote for Canadian outdoor educators. So just wrapping all this up, I'm going to share with you one of those internet memes that probably crops up in your Facebook pages from time to time, and is meant to inspire you to do great things. But I hope you see the point here. This is partly, of course, a point about children and learning, and the Vygotskians in the audience will, I think, particularly understand this, and this the value of taking children, into their zone of proximal development and scaffolding children's learning. But it is also, and more importantly, it is a message to you and an invitation to you, whatever your role in all of this, whether you're an educator, a trainer, a manager, a politician, a regulator, to get a little bit out of your comfort zone and do what you can to allow children the chance to engage with uncertainty, take a few risks and expand their horizons. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my slides now. There we go. Mary.
Yeah, I'll just come in to say thank you so much, Tim, for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. And
thank you.
I think your whole philosophy of resilience is just so powerful, and the biggest message really is the greatest risk is that there's no risk at all. So,
right.
And you're such an advocate for that. And just for your new book as well, the work you're doing at policy level is just incredible, and trying to move from car-centric to child-centric planning spaces. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to invite you back again, because that would be the next step for us. It would be so great to engage in that discussion with you.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. I'm just going to share with everybody a link. It's actually a link to my own website, but it says a bit more about the new book, and it has a sample, so you can download a 20-page sample. Sadly, the discounted price offer has gone because that was before Christmas, but
that's okay.
Just didn't want people to miss out. It would have been remiss of me not to share that, I think.
Thank you. No, and it's I have it ordered, so I'm looking forward to that. Louise is going to come in now and just go through some of the Q&A. So I'll sign off for now, and thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Tim. Certainly a thought-provoking presentation. I did drop the pen a couple of times, but I didn't drop my phone, ironically. But a really good demonstration. I saw coming up in the chat box how people really enjoyed that demonstration and how our subconscious. We do have a good few questions in, so I'm going to kind of flip over to the questions and see what some of your thoughts. So we've had people asking questions, and then they've been kind of ticking which questions we really want answered. So the first one is around adventure playgrounds. Are resources available to children in the UK, which I believe goes somewhere towards giving children some independence? And is this something which you should you believe should be explored here in Ireland?
Okay, so adventure playgrounds at their best are amazing. By the way, when I say adventure playgrounds, I mean staffed adventure playgrounds where there are professional play work staff. The term has sometimes been a bit abused, I would say, and just to describe anything that's, where you've got timber equipment. That's not what I mean. I mean a staffed and hopefully well-resourced, where there's loose parts, there's stuff that kids can make stuff with. They're amazing places at their best. And they've been the source of a lot of inspiration about the importance of play, and really quite challenging radical ideas about the role of play in childhood, and also some really interesting ideas about loose parts, about structures. I believe neighborhoods need to be more child friendly. I believe that should be the goal, and that we shouldn't go down the road of trying to just corral children into what I call play reservations, even if they are in fact wonderful places. Now, that's not to say we don't need more adventure playgrounds. One of the great things about adventure playgrounds is that they can be a kind of laboratory and a testing ground and a CPD, a place where professionals can come and see what a really what fully embracing play looks like. So I want to see more adventure playgrounds. I want to see them all over the world. I'm pleased to see there's something of a resurgence of interest in them in other parts of the world, in North America, in Australia. But I think we need to be realistic. Well, we need to be realistic. We're not going to see thousands of adventure playgrounds being built. So that they're never going to reach the lives of more than a minority of children directly, but they can be those laboratories and sources of inspiration. But we also, I think, need to focus much more on, if you like, taking the kind of experiences that happen in a good adventure playground, but dispersing them in the rest of children's lives. One example, loose parts play. There's a wonderful program called Play Pods, which is running in primary schools in England, which is about loose parts play in schools in playtime. Now, I think every school in the world, I don't see why that couldn't be part of a school offer. It doesn't need a whole lot of extra resources. It's much cheaper, by the way, to run a play pod program than to buy a bunch of expensive kit from a catalogue. And you've brought some of the magic of the adventure playground into children's lives. So I'm much more interested in that than just building a lot more reservations, no matter how wonderful those reservations might be. Yeah. I do think we need more, but I think we need to be more ambitious about changing the world outside the play reservation.
Absolutely. And you're bringing us on nicely, because we're going to have some students talking about loose parts in a few minutes from some of our GMIT students. Another hot topic, and I know you have mentioned this before, and I know it's certainly a conversation that we often have in GMIT and in the earlier sector and wider, is the childcare regulations. And we're very much looking at the demand within the regulations for risk assessments, both indoors and outdoors. And I suppose you have answered this in part within your presentation, but how can we get around the risk assessments, I suppose the paperwork element, to introduce play as we did in our own childhoods?
Okay, so there's at least two things there. First, the really important point about, I talk about the chain of command. Yeah, we're all familiar with this, aren't you? You're an educator, you've got your boss, you've maybe got a committee or some kind of governing body. Then you got the, owners, perhaps regulators. All of this works best when you've got a consistent approach up and down the chain of command. And I don't think we have that yet, but we're getting towards it. So you talk about, risk assessments and processes. In Scotland, the Care Inspectorate, so this is the licensing body for childcare in Scotland, promotes risk benefit. It would expect agencies not to use conventional risk assessments, but to use risk benefit assessments. Okay, so, and they've got to that point because there's been all of this conversation and work and debate within Scotland about how you get a balanced approach. So you need that to happen in Ireland. You need to get those people higher up the chain of command to be supporting a balanced approach, and that can take time. That health and safety executive statement that I shared, honestly, it took about 2 years of meetings, of drafting, of quite hard. Oh, also government lobbying. That happened because there was a government report on risk that identified problems with with being too protective in schools and children's play. So people in this audience need to, and I'm sure they are already, but take forward those conversations with the regulators. The second thing is more tricky, and that's about paperwork. I'm sorry to have to tell you that risk benefit assessment as a process is kind of neutral around the paperwork question. People who love their paperwork can go around and just, instead of risk assessing, they can risk benefit assess, every blade of grass, every rock, every boulder. There's a separate conversation I think needs to happen with the regulators and maybe with wider society about this burdensome demand for paperwork. And certainly in the UK, that conversation hasn't really got very far. The Health and Safety Executive says things like, managing risk isn't about mountains of paperwork. But then, of course, whenever there's a court case or any kind of inquest or inquiry, the first thing everybody looks for is the paperwork. So there's a real challenge there. And I think we're at the beginning of trying to figure out how we respond to that challenge. But a degree of deregulation is appropriate. And by the way, within playground safety standards, so these are the industry standards for playground equipment, we are seeing serious deregulation now. So I think this is really good news. Items that used to be expected to, there was a standard for X or a standard for Y, they're actually slimming down the standards and saying, no, we actually don't need to give any guidance about that. We don't need to talk about compliance. We can just leave it to judgment. So even there, there is some good news, but a lot of this it's been baked into the system for decades, and it's going to take a while to turn around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we just have one time for one more question, and I'm just going down through the question box here, and here's an interesting one, and I certainly look forward to your answer on this. So very interesting that you've mapped the area in which children can roam. Our children now also roam digitally. They are exploring worlds that are accessible to them in a virtual world. Perhaps the need to explore is being met not in the real world but elsewhere.
Absolutely, that's full of insight, that comment. By the way, I'm going to share I mentioned my book No Fear, and so did Mary. You can download the whole book No Fear for free as a PDF. So I'd be missing out if I didn't share it on the chat.
Thank you.
But to come back to your question, it is absolutely right, and there's a very interesting debate happening right now about the digital world and safety for children. And there's a general comment from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that, if you like, you can't get much higher up than the United Nations. And they've just issued a comment on children's digital lives. And Sonia Livingston, who's a wonderful researcher, she's a professor at the LSE in London, is really so much of the good stuff that's coming around children's digital lives is coming out of her, strongly grounded in children's rights, recognizes the importance of the digital world in children's lives. I am not somebody who thinks that technology is bad for kids. Technology is a tool, just like a bicycle or a car or a knife. You can use it for good or ill. And it's very clear also that, just as you said, children are, okay, so what do we know about children? They are the most effective learning machines on the planet, always have been. And much of what they learn from their own efforts and their own experience. They have a hunger for experience. And if we're not feeding that hunger in the real world, then it's no surprise that they go and seek out similar experiences, of course, particularly social experiences, hanging out with their friends and peers. It's no surprise that they do that online. And so, I don't see technology as a cause of this shift from the outdoors. It's more like a symptom. It's a symptom that in the 90s and the noughties, when children's lives really started getting restricted, that was the point where the internet started, if you like, growing, expanding and morphing and changing. And social media and engaging interactive spaces of various kinds emerged precisely because of the demand from people, crucially including young people, for those spaces, because they couldn't go out and see their friends and peers in real life.
Yeah, and I suppose we're certainly seeing that now with the current times that we're in. But then we're all here today from all over the world being able to listen to you. So that's a bonus of
absolutely. It's a very good point. And there are also some very interesting technological innovations that are blurring and weaving together our online and offline lives, and children and young people are often at the heart of that. So I'm not being blasé. I think there are some real problems, particularly with social media, and what some call the attention economy. I mean, I know this just from my own personal experience of, the hold that these things can have over our lives isn't always healthy. And so I'm not being laissez-faire about that, but I do think we need a nuanced understanding. We need to listen and engage with children and young people themselves, rather than just think we can, again, manage this for them.
Absolutely. Tim, that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you very much for a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation this morning. Very interactive, and the Menti was brilliant. So thank you very much for that. And I look forward to when we can engage more in the next number of months, as Mary has already said. So
thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank
you. So we're going to, I'm very excited. I've been asked to introduce our next 4 speakers. And our 4 speakers are 4th year students in early childhood education and care here in GMIT. And today we have 2 student poster presentations, which they're going to discuss with us. So I'm delighted to welcome Lana and Megan, Stephanie and Georgia, and they're going to be looking at the idea of loose parts